What's up, guys? Doug Polk here, and welcome back to Poker Hands. Today we're going to be taking a look at a hand from 5100 at Live at the Bike between Art and Brian. Let's go ahead and jump into the action.
I just know Cousins isn't there anymore, so it's not like they were great last year with him best player. Heads up.
Our hand begins at 5100 and the action on Brian, who looks down at 7-6 suited. Now, this is a hand when you're under the gun, you probably want to let go of a decent portion of the time, but it's okay to mix it into your range every now and then. It's one of those hands that can give you some unlikely strong hands in some spots where maybe some other players might think you're weak, so it's good to have that to disguise your range, but I'm not sure if this is going to be making a lot of money opening under the gun. Action folds around to Art in the small blind and looks down at King-Jack suited. And this is a tough situation when you're in the small blind. You're facing a fairly tight open range and you are out of position. I don't mind a strategy of only 3-betting and playing pretty tight here. When you do flat, your hand is somewhat face up. It can only really be mid to high pairs or some suited broadways. And if you get too much looser than that, well, you're just losing a lot of money in order to try and balance out your range. So if you want to have an approach with no flats at all, I don't mind that. If you want a small flat range, that's probably okay too. But tread carefully, because in this situation, your hand can be fairly face up. That's called foreshadowing. Anyway, Art does decide to call, and let's take a look at a different kind of flop than we normally do. Do you find yourself enjoying playing poker? Or do you find yourself enjoying watching poker? If either one of those applies to you, you have to check out the Live at the Bike merchandise. These are not jokes, including the Israeli Ron hoodie. Queen Deuce is a way of life. What kind of lame person puts way of life on a t-shirt? Queen Deuce not your speed? Maybe I could interest you in a Making Flushes Great Again t-shirt, of course featuring Gil the Plumber. Gil wouldn't be the only one flushing something with this purchase. If neither of those gems tickle your fancy, how about a Nick Vertucci Fear the Beard and the Stack t-shirt? And the Stack. I don't get it. Is it because maybe he's gonna stack you, or why are you afraid of the beard then? Is he buying deep? But then you're not deep. I don't think this makes sense. If I can't interest you in the Fear the Beard t-shirt, how about more of the Nick Vertucci Fear the Beard t-shirts? Ooh, they got it in red. That's what it was missing. I know what you're thinking. I need something a little more sensual. Well, then can I interest you in the Ludacris All-In You 3-Bet I'm All In t-shirt? Something tells me Chris is looking for something a little bit more than just your stack. Can you imagine actually wearing that? Ouch. I know this seemed off topic, but it was underneath the video of the hand itself and I couldn't help myself. Someone needed to say something. Anyway, let's take a flop.
Cardinals were actually one of those teams until we spent $20 million on fucking Sam Bradford.
Why does everyone want to pay so much money for Sam Bradford?
You need a quarterback.
The flop comes Queen 7-6. Art checks over to Brian, and now he decides to bet with his 7-6. And he goes for a smaller 1/3 pot size. I like this. On this board, if his opponent has something like a set or 8s plus, he's going to continue. If he has a queen, he's going to continue. But this puts a lot of hands in a tough spot. If he has a hand like Ace-Jack or King-Jack suited, or maybe a hand like pocket 4s or 5s, those hands are not nearly as clear. And using bet sizes to put a lot of your opponent's range in tough spots is generally going to be a good strategy. Also, by betting this size, it lets him bet a wide range of hands, so you can certainly get some value with hands like pocket 8s or ace-7 suited. So definitely a lot of upside here to this bet size. Now back over to Art with his King-Jack suited. It is a little bit of a tough situation. I think I like a solution of a little bit of all three options. Your favorite here on Poker Hands. That's right, a classic fold, call, or raise spot. I'm not sure I like fold too much, but you might want to throw her in there every now and then. I do like working in some raises. I think that you'll take it down a bunch facing some flop bluffs. You got some good backdoor equity. Open ender, of course, on a 10. On a club, you're going to have a flush draw. Some other cards might give you gutter. So you definitely have some backdoor playability. And then, of course, you could pair it with king for top pair, which is going to be a decent amount as well. So I like raise a good portion of the time here too. And then also, call isn't that bad. When you face these small sizes, you do have to do a lot of calling. So you can't go too wrong here, just know to mix it up with your play. Anyway, Art does decide to go with the live poker approach and call. Let's take a turn.
That's everything. Without it, you can't win.
Yeah, but it's he like you have to play games.
He's okay, yeah.
Thank
He never plays. Your horse got broken already, too.
Art with king jack of clubs, floating the flop with backdoors on the small bet.
Felt him in the pot.
Brian Kim with bottom 2. The turn, he picks up
Oh,
a ton
you're-
of equity.
You feel like
A
Nick is
gutter
going
and a
back.
flush draw.
There's no chance Brian's a fraction.
And Art could definitely check raise here, but Brian bets over pot on the turn.
The turn's the 9 of clubs, and our hand's getting a little bit more spicy. Now Art has a backdoor flush draw, and there are many rivers that can make this one to a straight. Brian's still got the goods with his 2 pair, but there are a bunch of hands that can beat him, including this gutter that Art also has. Art checks it over to Brian, and now Brian bets big. He goes with a slight overbet of the pot, $1,500. And I like this play from Brian too. When you bet this turn 9, you're going to want your range to be a much stronger range than this flop bet. This card is generally speaking good for the small blind. He can have pocket 9s, he can have 10s or 8s that now have straight draws to go along with their pair. If he's got a queen, he's still got top pair. He can definitely have the backdoor flush draw. All in all, I would say this is a fairly strong card for his range. Against that strategy, you don't want to bet too often, but when you do bet, you want it to be very strong hands as well as a few bluffs. 2 pair fits the bill, and what's particularly good about 2 pair is when you have the 7-6 of diamonds here, you now know that your opponent is much less likely to have a set. There's only one combination of 7s left in the deck. His opponent would have to have 7 of spades, 7 of clubs, and same thing for 6s. They'd have to have 6 of hearts and 6 of spades. So now that he knows his opponent is much less likely to have a set, it makes a lot of sense here to bet big. Over to Art, this is where I would really like to see Art check raise. He could definitely have pocket 9s. If he's playing a little loose pre, maybe he could have 10-8 suited. And he could also have some trapped sets from the flop. Maybe, and it's kind of unlikely, but maybe he has queen 9 suited, although that would be a bit too loose here in the small blind. But I think he's got enough hands that he can credibly represent to raise the turn. Neither player has to be too worried about the straight because neither one of them should ever have 8-5 suited. And while Brian should occasionally have 10-8 suited, Art really shouldn't. So if you have a set here, you want to raise fearlessly knowing that you're almost certainly good. Art decides to just call. This seems a little bit too weak to me. Now, I like mixing in a call every now and then, but I certainly think on average you should be raising. You have no showdown value. Unless you improve on this river, you're going to lose if it goes check, check. And in those situations, take a little initiative and go for the gusto. Or get some gusto. I wanted to work in the word gusto. Anyway, Art does decide to call, and let's take a river.
And the river's an 8. Interesting river card. You would expect this to go check, check unless Art decides to bluff, but no, Art checks it.
Oh,
You have
man.
top set here.
Yeah, that's what I would have.
Or aces. Aces makes way more sense.
It
than
does,
top
yeah.
Set. Top set you can still beat shit.
Art wasn't so good at poker these days, huh, Dan? And then we could hear him and Nick whine in like a sympathy.
I miss whining.
But he plays too good. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whining Art was fun.
When you play.
And look at this. Brian Kim is going to bet for value with bottom 2 pair on this 4-liner board. What an ambitious bet. 1,300 into 4,200. He's betting less than a third pot. You know, most players would check back here. But if he puts Art on a queen, he wants to get value. Now Art thinking this one over. And Art can't be thinking of calling here with king I. He's got to be thinking about whether it's a good spot to make a move here and check raise bluff. And he's going to. Look at this. He's grabbing chips.
8,000, raise to 8,000.
8,000 is the check raise from Art. Wow.
Timer.
And very interesting because Brian shouldn't be betting this river without a straight. He's in position. He can easily just check back. But Art knows that Brian is willing to bet this river with a value hand that isn't a straight. If Art thought that Brian had a 10, Art would never make this move, of course.
The river is an offsuit 8, which is one of the craziest cards in the deck. Now we have 1 to a straight on both sides. A 5 or a 10 gives a player a straight, and so both players have to tread a little more carefully. Art checks here over to Brian. I wouldn't hate seeing a lead here from Art. I do think on cards that dramatically change the board like this, and when you absolutely can have a 10, I think Art absolutely could have pocket 10s, 10-9 suited, maybe a hand like Jack 10 of clubs if you decided to play that passively as well. So when you can have this amount of 10s, I wouldn't mind leading a few of your worst possible hands like King Jack and a few of your 10s. Now you should still definitely check some 10s. You don't want your checks to all be weak, but developing a leading range can have a lot of value for you here, and in a polarized spot like this, I wouldn't mind seeing him implement that. If you're not going to have a lead range, which I don't mind that approach, I like the check here from Art. Now for Brian, and this is a spot that I thought about for a bit here before I made the episode because I was trying to think about what I think about this bet. But basically, he decides to go for something around a 1/4 pot river bet in this spot. And I think that I like this play. Now, it's close because his opponent can have 10s, 9s, and 8s. If he didn't trap the turn with 9s, his opponent could have a hand like maybe King 10 suited of clubs, maybe Jack 10 suited of clubs. Maybe a hand like Ace 10 of clubs. There's a couple hands I can think that his opponent might have here. But if you think about the combos that the small blind is likely to have, Ace Queen seems like a very likely small blind flat, and there are a lot of combinations of that. Then, of course, you have King Queen suited, Queen Jack suited, a lot of these hands, and then also you have to think about the fact you do block some of the sets, and your opponent has to have trapped you. So overall, I think I don't mind checking it back on the river or going for the really small bet that Brian went for. They both can make some sense to me. If you do bet, it has to be small like Brian went, because if you start betting too big, well, your opponent can do a lot of folding and just continue with stronger 2 pairs and sets. I think I'd advocate for a check back, but I don't mind the play. Back over to Art, I think you should absolutely fold King Jack suited. And, here's the thing. We talk a lot about our ranges a lot, and when you face a bet, you want to fold the bottom of your range, raise with a few hands that can't quite call the middle, and raise your value bets. I don't think that the actual worst possible hand Art can have here makes much sense to bluff with. What I also don't like about this hand is that you want Brian to have a hand like King Jack, that bet the flop and then turn some equity. You want him to have a hand like maybe if he opened with Ace, or if you decided to take this line with Ace Jack suited or Ace King suited, and you block those flush draws. So I don't like the fact that you block a bunch of the hands that you want Brian to be bluffing with. This is kind of funny because I advocated for a raise pre, and then I advocated for a raise on the flop, and I advocated for a raise on the turn, and then only 3 I don't advocate for a raise for. Well, you guys know what's going to happen. While I don't love this raise from Art, he raised to 8,000, I do appreciate the sentiment of he's trying to put Brian in the spot and thinks he might be trying to value bet very thin against what's likely a queen, which, to be fair, is what's happening. Back over to Brian, who got the bad news. What should he do? Well, his opponent is raising to just about pot, so he only has to call here with around a third of his hands. He's going to have some straights. He can certainly have Jack 10. He could have Ace 10. He's not going to really have too many other 10s other than that. King 10 suited, Ace 10, Jack 10 suited. Those are certainly hands he could have. And I don't think he's going to have a 5 very often here either, unless maybe it was a hand like Ace 5 of clubs. But is that enough hands to call this raise and not allow himself to get bluffed? Well, is he going to take this line with a hand like aces? Seems much worse to me, because in that situation, you block one of the most likely call hands, Ace Queen. So I think that this hand is likely low enough in his range to where he might just be willing to let it go. But it's very important when you think about your call hands to not have overcards to the board. Why might that be? Well, if you do have an ace or a king, you block some of his most common bluffs. If Art decides to bluff here, it's probably going to be with a hand like Queen Jack, King Queen, Ace Queen. And so you want your kicker or your hand to not be blocking those kickers that Art can be bluffing with. So in summary today, blockers, call, fold, raise, other stuff, do things, mix it up. Thanks for watching Poker Hands.
But Art knows that Brian can bet 3 streets as thin as a really good value hand that isn't a straight, maybe a set or 2 pair. He has the worst of those hands. So Brian essentially has the bottom of his range here in terms of value with 6-7. But he's still thinking this one over. And Art just put him in a tough spot after Brian tries to go for thin value against a really good player. These are 2 really good players battling against each other in a leveling war. Art Papazian and Brian Cam, these guys know each other really well. And can Brian figure this one out?
Do you go to football games, Nick?
Do I go to them?
Yeah.
I have, yeah. I usually watch them on TV.
Sort of excited about 2 teams in town. Like, I wasn't living here.
Oh,
last
having
year.
2 teams, yeah. Yeah. Got it.
How far is the Coliseum from downtown?
I don't know.
Garrett, do you know the answer to that?
Coliseum from downtown's like 2 miles.
So. Because Carson's far, I think, right?
Yeah, Carson is not close.
Good thing the Rams are way better.
What's that?
It's a good thing the Rams are the better team.
Yeah, it's only for what, this year and then next year. I think
Next
the
year they'll
after
both
that.
be in Hollywood Park, right? Or 2 years from now.
2 years from now, yeah. I mean, it'll be such a sports hub around
you think-
the country. So many big events will be there. It'll be very cool, I think.
Do you think games are going to move to that casino?
Impossible to know, right?
Yeah.
Probably yes, but when it comes to like high stakes games, it's all just like, I don't see why they would.
Right.
They could, but
Like 2, 5, 5, 10,
right.
probably.
But yeah, but the games would
Floods
definitely
there.
They would have to get better.
Yeah.
For smaller games. Yeah.
Go. Wow, was that fucking close, huh? Jesus.
Wow. Nice hand.
And what a call by Brian Kim, and what a hand. $20,000 pot. And look at Art's face. Wow.
Look at this. What the fuck is this bitch doing?
What a crazy hand between Art and
What a
Brian.
great face.
If you guys enjoyed today's video, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you again soon.